Something I've been thinking about: mind, thoughts, and the process of thinking, and how important it is to expose ourselves to really good ideas, good books, even good people, good surroundings, to help us to think much more clearly, much more effectively, and of course produce very different outcomes, particularly so if we want to produce a better life for ourselves and those around us. And as I was going through some of our bookshelves, I came across a well-known book by James Allen titled As a Man Thinketh. And I thought I would come on and share some passages today and my thoughts on them as we prepare for 2025, really to envision a new life for ourselves and our families, and to begin to bring about the desires of our hearts. So here we go. He says, "The outer world of circumstance shapes itself to the inner world of thought, and both pleasant and unpleasant external conditions are factors which make for the ultimate good of the individual. As the reaper of his own harvest, man learns both by suffering and bliss." It highlights for me, the importance of having an environment that's conducive to a solid mental state. This means having things around you that produce really good thoughts about not only yourself, but the world in which we live. Something I think about in relation to Eckhart Tolle, he says, it's not the experience that causes us problems, it is our thinking about the experience. And here, I'm thinking about the brain and how the ideas to which we're exposed cause us to think in specific ways. Every action being preceded by a thought, those thoughts inform our actions. Those actions inform our outcomes. And so if we want different outcomes, we have to begin to think differently. And to begin to think differently, we have to expose ourselves to new ideas and information. Output is always equal to input. And so in thinking about this passage, it highlights how what we're going to reap is a function of what's going on in our heads. I got a really good friend of mine we were discussing recently, and he talked about the importance of always engaging in positive thought. A positive mental attitude is what Napoleon Hill refers to it as. And so when we engage in thinking positively, even looking for the silver lining in problematic circumstances, we find ourselves being able to really switch, if you will, internally, to think differently, to think much more from a holistic perspective, knowing that no matter what happens in your life, that you have the capacity within you to respond to it in a way that's beneficial for you and also to those around you. Now, in relation to what I do, my wife and I, we teach the Transcendental Meditation program here at Metropolitan Boston, and ourselves have been practicing TM for 16 years. And what I found that TM does for me is it helps me to slow down. It helps me to take a beat, if you will. I kind of liken it to that passage from Viktor Frankl's book, Man's Search for Meaning, where he talks about you go from this idea of stimulus and response, and the difference between the two is that there's a junction point. And I like to say stimulus and reaction, primarily because we often react to things, and we often react negatively to things based on our socialization or, again, the ideas to which we've been exposed. I'd like to take that from stimulus and reaction to stimulus and response, in that as we continue to practice TM, the calmness that we experience during the meditation being brought with us into the day allows us to take that beat, if you will. And in that pause between stimulus and reaction, there's this junction point. And that junction point is populated with ideas. And being populated with ideas, we select them. We act on them. So that what would have been a reaction to that stimulus has now been transmuted into a response. And oftentimes that response is something that's much more beneficial, much more life-affirming. And so when I think about that, I think about how we have more control over the world around us in terms of how we respond to things than we heretofore have thought. When I think about what that really means, I realize that as we begin to think differently because of the ideas to which we've been exposed, we can't but produce very different outcomes. On page 64, he says, "The vision that you glorify in your mind, the ideal that you enthrone in your heart, this you will build your life by. This you will become." The vision is that image that we hold in our mind, which is nothing but a thought, materialized, if you will, in our mind. And so when you ruminate over that thought, When you decide that you want to build your life in a very different fashion, it requires thinking differently. It requires new ideas. It requires new information. It may even require a change of your surroundings. But what you're really doing is you're fortifying your interior resolve to move in a particular direction to achieve a specific outcome. But it all comes back to mind. It all comes back to how we think about the world in which we live and how we think about the world that we are creating. That's a key thing. Most of us have been disinvested from the idea that we're creating the world in which we live, and nothing could be further from the truth. We are actually invested in it. Oftentimes, unconsciously, my argument is that we begin to do it consciously, begin to recognize the power of our mind, the power of our thinking, the ideas that we ingest on a daily basis, and take the time as we prepare for 2025 to begin to craft a diet, a mental diet that is going to be supportive, not just for the short term, but for the long term as it relates to realizing some of our highest and our best aspirations. But that requires us to think differently. That requires us to ingest ideas such as what we learned from James Allen in his book, As a Man Thinketh. That requires us to sit in quiet contemplation from time to time to allow the ideas to surface within our minds to then act on them. So much so, those ideas surfacing will ultimately come to us outside the meditation. So much so that when you sit to practice the meditation, when you learn to get quiet and allow the mind to do what it's designed to do, it's going to serve up to you the ideas that you can then act on. But that can only occur if you begin to feed your mind ideas, if you begin to ingest and understand the ideas, be it from books, be it from podcasts, be it from social media, be it from random conversations or directed conversations with another. That's going to feed your mind. And in feeding your mind, you are feeding your actions. And in feeding your actions in a conscious fashion, you're fueling positive outcomes. But it requires us to think differently. It requires us to do differently. It requires us to be okay with really coming to understand that we have more latent capacities that we've heretofore acknowledged. I'm going to leave you with this last passage. He who has conquered doubt and fear has conquered failure. His every thought is allied with power, and all difficulties are bravely met and wisely overcome. His purposes are seasonably planted, and they bloom and bring forth, which does not fall prematurely to the ground. And on 29 August 2001 at 12:41 a.m., I actually wrote in the margins here, not in the sense of not encountering obstacles, but in the sense of perspective. To not see such obstacles as failure is indeed the mark of a wise mind. For such failures are only stepping stones to better opportunities. And so I want to leave us with that and to begin to encourage us to think differently, encourage us to become supremely comfortable with exploring ideas, implore us to become confident in the capacities that we have within us and act on them in a very direct manner by supplying our minds with wonderful ideas upon which to reflect and produce a very different life moving forward. Those are my thoughts on As a Man Thinketh by James Allen. Until next time.